Hello from New York.
Greetings from London.
So this week we are celebrating 10 years of ID Comms. It's our 10th birthday, so happy birthday, mate. And I apologise that I can't be in London this week to celebrate with you and the team.
You were missed.
Thank you. What we're going to do is on Media Snack across the coming weeks is just reflect a little bit on some of the major changes that have happened across the industry and certainly in those 10 years, the big things that David and I have noticed in that time. And the first one of those is trust, unfortunately. Maybe we're bored of hearing about trust and transparency, but this thing looks like it's coming to a head maybe. So what is going on in the world of trust?
Well, I mean, trust specifically between advertiser and their media agency, I think it would be fair to say that it is in absolute crisis. You look back 10 years ago, most advertisers had absolute, almost unconditional trust with their media agencies and the supply chain because it was far simpler. You fast forward that to now, and everybody, even the agencies, are acknowledging how poor and weak that level of trust is. I mean, we've conducted our own research on a number of waves and indicating that actually trust levels is declining from what we believe to be an all-time low. All of the trade bodies, all of the speaking platforms are talking about this diminishing trust between advertiser and their media agency partners, because that's the failing of a partnership. If you don't trust the people that you're supposed to be partnering with, that's a really, really sad place to be. So I think the biggest theme that I've noticed in the last 10 years of working with you with ID Comms is that decline in trust. And you must have seen that in particular in the US recently, right, Tom?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, it's sad, that we can't, or the industry can't seem to kind of get out of this yet. But it looks like there's a little bit more affirmative action because it's absolutely, as you say, it's fundamental to the long-term success of advertisers and agencies working together. That is not up for discussion. And I think the agency community perhaps had some resistance to that, being so fundamental historically. But it looks like maybe we're turning a corner. And the reason that we say that, and this is the stuff that's coming out of the US right now, is it looks like all sides are starting to acknowledge that this is something that needs to be fixed. And I say that, and it's quite relevant. Last week in the US, in Washington, D.C., the 4As, which is the agency's trade body, okay, so the 4As is the American Association of Advertising Agencies, they held their annual media conference, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to that, but also I was moderating a panel of marketers at that conference. The day started with Nick Bryan, who heads up the Dentsu group across the Americas, on the media side, with a real call to arms for his kind of agency peers, and he called it the hard truths. And it was quite an interesting way to start this forum. And this was not a conference which was involved in agencies slapping each other on the back and talking about their shared successes or burying their heads in the sand. He encouraged everybody to really confront these hard truths, one of which, I mean, the start point of most of that is really just about trust and transparency. So after Nick's presentation, he then hosted a panel upon which was a gentleman called Matt Baxter, who viewers may know is the CEO of Initiative. And Matt is he's quite well, he's articulate in this area and outspoken. And he was the first person I think I've really heard publicly say, trust is a fundamental issue in this media agency business or running a media agency, and unless we address that and solve for it, everything else becomes academic. So I mean, he was saying to his peers on stage and in the audience, let's not get distracted by anything else. We have to address the trust issue, okay? And the start points of that in our view are, you've got to kind of deconstruct it. What is causing the lack of trust, or what has caused the deterioration of trust in such a dramatic fashion over those last 10 years? So the 4As are prepared to tackle it, we think. And Matt said, the 4As need to get, grow some teeth, I think he said, like the ANA, which is the advertisers' trade body here in the US, who, again, loyal viewers will know we talk a lot about as a very impressive trade body organization, really the most powerful trade organization on the planet in terms of resources and voice, but centered here in the US. They have launched an initiative called the Trust Consortium, which is launching officially in May, and ID Comms is a founding partner or founding member of the Trust Consortium, and we will be involved in their launch event in May and on a panel there talking about trust. This is starting to bring together lots of different voices, disparate voices maybe across the industry, who are focused on serving the needs of the marketers, but into a single place with a single voice, and then using the ANA platform to kind of amplify that around the world. So there's lots of stuff going on. So it feels like we're building momentum towards some, at least acknowledgement that trust is the issue, and we need agencies to be a part of that conversation as much as the advertisers. Okay, so if trust is low, then what are the implications?
Well, the key implication is that you've got to get the transparency piece right. I mean, that's the platform by which any trusting relationship will work, okay? And I mean, if you look back 10 years ago, is it a coincidence perhaps that, you know, we've gone down this slippery slope of lack of trust at a time when, you know, the programmatic supply chain has taken more and more of advertisers' dollars? Who knows? If programmatic hadn't been invented, would we be in this situation? Who knows? The other thing that I think is interesting is that 10 years ago was when the procurement departments of many advertising companies began to take control over agency contracts and looking at the commercial terms by which those agencies were engaging with the advertisers. And so if procurement were looking at media being more of a cost and beginning to sort of tighten the screws on fees, that was obviously a catalyst for agencies perhaps needing to look at other ways of generating income. And you combine money migrating to a murky programmatic supply chain combined with agencies not being able to generate the right kind of income through the appropriate means, and that becomes pretty combustible. Yeah,
I think that the research that we did, bears that out, that transparency is the key driver of trust, but we can't keep going around in circles as an industry, or us observing the industry going around in circles, just saying, well, transparency is a driver of trust. We need more trust. Let's get greater transparency. The marketers have to demand that. That's exactly right, which is, if you keep obsessing about cost and price and discount and auditing as being the measure of success in media, and you keep leaning on the agency to deliver those things, then they're increasingly going to have to come up with clever ways to actually make money or find profit. So the two parties are somewhat guilty of this, creating this race to the bottom. And on the way down, it's eroding trust, because the only way that agencies are able to make the margins that they need to make is through loss of transparency. And knowingly by clients, they're signing off, non-disclosed deals, thinking that it gives them access to cheaper inventory. But actually it may give them access to lower quality inventory or stuff that they just don't quite know about. But they're accepting loss of transparency as a mechanic by which to lower cost. That attitude has got to change. It's the beginning of our climb back up, and it will allow agencies to be more transparent. They can come to the table with a lot more goodwill and willing to do this, by the way, because they're not really pushing their advertisers to make them transparent. But they need to be able to be more transparent when they get asked to do so. These are the big implications on both sides, is that we've got to come together to address the behaviours that need to change, and it's the trade bodies. The ANA and the 4As as good examples of bringing these two parties together, hopefully around the same point of discussion, which is what we need to do. Right, so then if you're a marketer, what should you be thinking and doing?
First and foremost, pay your agencies fairly, okay? So the way that you pay your agencies is going to have a massive impact on the behaviors that they exhibit when they plan and buy your media. So fair remuneration is absolutely critical. The second thing is to make sure that you've got the most transparent contract in place to hold the agency to account. And thirdly, whenever you're discussing media with your agencies or internally, change the narrative away from price and buying cheap stuff, lots of it, to media being a value, a driver of business growth. That is absolutely critical. You get these things right, then that trust will begin to forge itself, and it'll work really well with both parties.
Yep. And I think just to build on that, from the agency side, the trade bodies provide us a very good platform upon which to have these conversations, right? So in the US here, the ANA and the 4As need to make this an agenda point and bring everyone together around the same thing. Marketers, in our experience, are pretty aligned on this stuff. Don't have much wild disagreement. I got a sense from the 4As conference last week. I mean, the agencies are not quite there yet. There's some disagreements between agency leadership as to how serious this is and what the causes are. So the first step for agencies is to find alignment, right? If this is a big issue that needs tackling, you've got to get aligned with a perspective on it. You don't need to come with all the answers, but you've got to get on the same platform and be prepared to meet marketers around the same kind of agenda points. So there's a little bit of work to do, I think, first on the agency side before we can make real progress. Right, the media snack, bottom line on trust. One, trust is in crisis, but it's going to require greater transparency in order to fix it. It's the only thing to do. There are two sides to this conversation. The advertisers and agencies need to come together to talk about it more and acknowledge how trust can be improved. And thirdly, it's the trade bodies that will really give the platform for this discussion. They are not responsible to fix it, but they will give us the platform for debate and improvement. Right, good week 4.
Good week for ID Comms. This week we celebrated our 10th birthday, so a very special week for us, but also a very special week for an advertising agency called Droga 5 that was acquired by Accenture Interactive. Apparently the biggest deal that Accenture Interactive have ever done, a massive statement intent by them. So beware the traditional holding companies. Tom, a bad week for?
Well, bad week. I mean, the companies are going up and down in lifts here. The one that's going down in the lift is Seismic, who you may or may not have heard of. I mean, viewers may not be aware of Seismic, but really they're a programmatic business and being positioned as a rival to Google's kind of domination in some of these spaces. Seismic was acquiring over the last few years a whole number of different ad tech companies. They famously bought Rocket Fuel, if you remember. Rocket Fuel, which was valued in the billions like 10 years ago, or less than 10 years ago, was bought in the hundreds of millions and is now worth precisely zero. So Seismic has filed for bankruptcy. Doesn't look like that's going to be rescued in any meaningful way. It's just another example of maybe the ad tech kind of ecosystem clearing itself out. We're going to see more consolidation probably from more robust players. But people are losing money in the ad tech space, which maybe not be hugely surprising to those of us that work closely with marketers, but there's big change underway. Question of the week: is improving trust the responsibility of the agencies and the advertisers?
Yes, no, whatever.
Very good. So that's your media snack for this week. I will be at the ANA's media conference, so if you're there, please come say hi. I look forward to seeing you. But that's all for this week. Thank you very much for watching.
See you next time.